Hello and welcome to PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz, coming to you from a Chicago hotel, River North. I'm about to slap some Portillos after this, so great day to be great. As always on this edition of the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast, we're talking all things DFS, looking at that DraftKings main slate. Not exactly the strongest slate, as we'll get to. We got Chiefs-Chargers on Thursday night, Raiders-Browns, Patriots-Colts on Saturday, and Saints-Buccaneers Sunday night, and Vikings-Bears on Monday night. So certainly got to find some new guys to play, but always capable. And hey, if you listen to this podcast, you had your season-long team get knocked out, looking to get some revenge now instead of all the way in next September, this is the show for you. So as always, I'm joined by none other than PFF's own Andrew Erickson, a.k.a. the Prop Prophet. Andrew, how are you, my friend?
Doing good. I was doing a lot better before I looked at the slate, looked at these running backs, and I was like, man, are we sure Deebo Samuel doesn't have running back eligibility yet? Come on. I really want to play him in my running back slot because I don't love the running backs on this slate, but we'll get into it. But I'm doing good, man. Holidays are coming up. The props have been pretty good so far this year. And yeah, man, I'm ready for week 15. Playoffs are heating up. Fantasy playoffs are here. I actually made it in a lot of my season-long leagues. So I think that reflects well on how I did this year as an analyst. Hopefully the listeners are in a lot of leagues as in playoffs as well. So yeah, all good over here.
Man, the one league I really disappointed in was this sleeper tournament we had, because what I didn't realize, and it got me 4 times throughout the year, because, Andrew, when you're in a lot of leagues, usually for me, I go Wednesday and Sunday morning check-ins, maybe, and, Thursday night before, obviously, but it's not like I'm looking at these each and every day when you're in 15 of them. And the sleeper league, we were lucky enough to play with A.J. Dillon, the actual A.J. Dillon. Very cool. The problem was, because A.J. Dillon, has other things to do on Sunday than just sit around and watch Red Zone, they disabled the ability to add drop players on Sunday morning. So time after time after time, I lost one game by 0.1 because I had my quarterback on the bench. There were some other just atrocities, Andrew, that, they're my fault. And here I am just complaining about it, making myself even a bigger loser about it. But yeah, I don't think I'm going to join any fantasy leagues where you can't add and drop on Sunday morning in the future. Wild concept. That's what you get for playing fantasy football with real football players. So anyway, Andrew, let's talk some cash. As you mentioned, this is absolutely brutal. Almost every single position, honestly. We're looking for a cheap tight end. I got all the way up to the top at George Kittle before I saw someone that I really wanted to play. We'll start things off at quarterback, though. I think Tua at 5.7K is probably the cheapest you can go. We got Jalen Hurts, our usual cash game staple, at 6.6K. We still know he's at least playing through the pain to an extent. He was practicing on Wednesday, but in a limited fashion. We also got Matthew Stafford at 7K, who might make sense if we decide to end up wanting to get up to Cooper Kupp, getting that Van Jefferson in there as well with Odell Beckham out. So, Andrew, I know you're kind of between Stafford and Tua. Which way are you leaning this week? Because there's not, someone. We have Gabriel Davis, we have Devontae Parker, we have some wide receivers that we'll talk about. There's nobody that we can save a ton of cash with. With that said, the early builds, I do think it's reasonable enough to get up to Stafford.
Yeah, I think that we don't have right now any free square running. Maybe Duke Johnson. It's possible, depending on how this Miami backfield. If someone shows up to play running back, who knows? But again, that's just another reason to kind of back Tua as an option at 5.7, because we know the Dolphins like to throw the ball anyway. They have the 6th highest neutral passing game script, so they throw the ball even when they play bad defenses against the run, like that, because they can't run block. So if they don't have any running backs, kind of seems like they're going to lean in towards Tua throwing the ball with Waddle, with Devontae Parker. I love it's so easy to stack with Tua, even in cash, with Parker or Waddle. Those guys are both really, really cheap, especially Parker. So I think that if you want to pay it for one of these running backs, you need to jam in Najee or Joe Mixon. They don't have great matchups, but they're just touch monsters. So that the floor is going to be there for those guys, especially with Najee because he's more involved in the passing game. But I didn't find myself really needing to want those guys, those running backs, and the guys I wanted were more in the 6K range. So I was able to get up to Stafford pretty easily, and I like him more than Kyler Murray and Rodgers, who, again, Kyler against the Lions, okay, yeah, of course, it's a great spot. Obviously, no one's going to argue about him being in a terrible spot, but he's expensive, and it's about you look at the lines, they've actually allowed the 10th fewest fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. It's because teams just run all over them, and quarterbacks aren't asked to do a lot. And that's kind of the same thing I feel like with Aaron Rodgers. Like if Lamar Jackson doesn't play, okay, they'll get up and they'll get the ball to AJ. I mean, the Packers are more than happy to run the ball like 30 times. So from a competitive game standpoint, like Stafford kind of fits. He kind of checks off all the boxes, like a good matchup on paper. He has good receivers. He has good weapons. You can stack him. And the Seahawks can do enough on offense to like keep the Rams pedal to the metal. So I think Stafford really fits in nicely at 7K.
Just quickly on Tua. He had actually, I believe, an overall QB1 week at some point this year. I just had this up. Yes. Okay. All the way back in week 7, he did finish as the overall QB1. Since then, hasn't finished back in the top 12. He does have 2 top 13 finishes, though. Hasn't finished outside of top 20. So we don't usually get the big time rushing floor from Tua. He is capable, though. Like we have seen it from time to time. And to your point, throws the ball enough that it doesn't matter. So Tua, if you want to go low. Stafford, if you want to go high. And similar to Tua, the stacking partners are just really easy this week with Stafford because Odell Beckham, unfortunately, is on the COVID list. So everyone in LA was vaccinated. So as always, make sure you tune in to our injury report edition of this podcast on Friday evening, and we'll be sure to update our thoughts on all of this. Now, Andrew, at running back, Urban Meyer, he's gone. He got fired for a multitude of reasons. And the one I think I was the least mad about was the one that seemed to be the straw that broke the camel's back. I don't know. He kicked the kicker, man. Like, is that really a crime in the year 2021? Apparently it is, and he is out. So he has freed the artist known as James RB1 son. 5.4K against the Texans makes way too much sense. We also got James Conner at 6.4K. Even if Edmonds comes back, man, we're playing the Lions here. Like, I think if we just never even had the Edmonds injury happened and we just looked at this schedule, we would say this is the James Conner week. And the assumption that Edmonds could even come back to his usual role, I think is probably a stretch, particularly given how great Conner has been as a pass catcher. So Robinson at 5.4K, Conner at 6.4K. I think both of them can safely be put in. After that is where it gets interesting because, yes, if Elijah Mitchell clears the concussion protocols and he's fine, he's a lock against the Falcons. Other than that, though, Andrew, that's where it gets tough. And I think that's where we need to go wide receiver because I don't see like anyone else. We have some potential, if Darrell Henderson stays out, which doesn't seem likely, then we can go to Sony Michel, but Robinson, Conner, Sony potentially, Elijah potentially. Other than that, man, I think I'm good. To your point, I don't want to pay up all the way. If you just have excess salary for whatever reason and want to get Najee, like, okay, not the worst thing in the world. But to me, it's Robinson, Conner, and then maybe these other guys depending on injury.
Dude, you don't want to pay up for Ezekiel Elliott, man?
Oh, man, look at me, right? Just a square.
I mean, dude, we saw. I didn't even play Zeke at all last week. Like, I know Pollard was out, and he got steamed a little bit. I was like, guys, we've watched him play. He's got to score 3 touchdowns. It's unfortunate that Zeke is kind of limping to the finish line, and
literally
he's still a top 10 running back fantasy because he's not actually injured yet. He hasn't missed any games, so he's kind of getting there. But it's sad to watch. I mean, I wish they would just get him healthy and just rest him. But I mean, they at least they have a lock on the division, so hopefully they can rest him so they can use him a little bit more in the postseason. But yeah, I mean, it's gross at running back. I was trying to look like Antonio Gibson his price didn't change at all. So he's still at 6K, but last week we saw the floor with him. And if they fall behind in a game, he can get game scripted out. And that's not what you want to do in cash games. I know McKissick had a DNP on Wednesday, so we'll kind of see how that plays out. Again, if McKissick doesn't play again, I would be willing to go back towards Antonio Gibson because we don't know, will Elijah Mitchell play? That's a question mark. James Conner is day-to-day with an injury, so for some reason he can't go. Then Gibson would kind of have to be someone you'd have to try to end up pivoting towards just because it's such a weak slate when it comes to the running back position. The Seahawks or the Rams running backs, we don't know. We're not getting any updates on who the guy is. We want to play whoever the starting running back is, but we don't know who it is. So I think just getting Stafford, Cooper Kupp, it's all right, whatever. That's how I'll attack the Seahawks defense with these Rams running back. But yeah, I wrote down 2 other guys that and they're really more like GPPs. So yeah, I mean, running back, there's really not that many. I mean, Deontay Foreman's the next guy I feel semi decent about, and there's no way I would play him in cash. So yeah, that's where we're at with running back.
And even if Mitchell's out, man, we can't really get behind Jeff Wilson as much as we would like to. JaMychal Hasty is active. Deebo Samuel's doing his thing. So you look at Wilson last week, 13 carries, 56 yards, no scores, and not even a single target, sub 60% snap rate. And in tournament, hey, they're facing the Falcons. I can get behind that, obviously, but in cash games, miss me with that. Once again, James Robinson, James Conner, Elijah Mitchell, Sony, if their other teams' running backs are out. Wide receiver, quite a few more options. We got Gabriel Davis, 3.7K, eating that chalk all day long with Emmanuel Sanders out with a knee injury. Also, Josh Allen banged up, could see them passing the ball a little bit more than usual. And Andrew, last week we were all over Cole Beasley because of some of the, stats we had behind the scenes, looking at that matchup against a zone-heavy Buccaneers defense. This week, they are actually facing a Panthers defense that has run the 6th most cover snaps in either cover 0, cover 1, putting their corners on an island and basically not giving them any safety help. They have one guy back there in cover 1, obviously, but nothing that's like a too high set. Last week, they had Stephon Gilmore shadow for the first time all season. They're going to do that again. He'll be tracking Stephon Diggs. That leaves Gabriel Davis. And if you look at the Bills' target rates against cover 0 and cover 1 this year, Diggs is number 1 because he's Stephon Diggs. Number 2, though, higher than Dawson, higher than Beasley, higher than Sanders by far is Gabriel Davis. So against man coverage, Allen has been willing to target Gabriel Davis. Probably too much of an explanation. We could have just said, hey, he's a chalky 3.7K wide receiver and we're playing a cash game. Put him in there and let's go move on. So if that's your cup of tea, that's fine. But just realize I do think Davis is good enough and based on the matchup, checks enough boxes from that point of view to warrant the chalkiness that he has had. Beyond that, we got Devontae Parker, only 4.3K. He's one of the only guys this year, I was surprised to see this, where he has, I believe it's at least 4 catches in every single game. So he really hasn't busted at all. He's just been injured throughout the year. He's looked really as good as ever with contested situations. Came back from that injury in week 13, was back to his usual role, and now has had a full bye to get right again. Obviously not afraid of that Jets defense. Van Jefferson, 5.6K if OBJ is out. We mentioned that. And then from there, Andrew, I was able to get all the way up to Cup early, but that makes it a little bit tougher at tight end. So I think kind of the 2v2 thing we got to look at a little bit here is do we want to go all the way up to Cooper Kupp, or can we settle for someone like a Deontay Johnson, like a CeeDee Lamb, and then that allows us to get up at tight end. So with all that in mind, I know you're with me on Parker, on Jefferson, on Gabe Davis. Where do you fall on do you want to go all the way up to Cooper, or are you more content to get someone like Deontay, get someone like a Jalen Waddle, and then pay up elsewhere in the lineup?
Yeah, I'm always down to punt tight end. So I know that Kittle's obviously I'm fine with punting tight end if that means I can get Cooper Kupp and Deontay Johnson. Because that's the thing, that's why we don't like Najee, because I would just rather play Deontay Johnson. The guy has over a 30% target share. He's playing the Titans, who are the worst team in terms of fantasy points allowed wide receivers. That's how you attack them. You attack them through the air. They actually have one of the better run defenses against running backs this year, and we've seen it with Najee where he gets volume, but then if he's really inefficient, he just doesn't get there all the time. He's had a couple bad games, even with a ton of volume. So I think Deontay, there are 2 guys that have 30% target shares on this slate, and it's Cooper Kupp and it's Deontay Johnson, over the last 4 weeks. So those are the guys, because running back is so weak, I want to, be greedy at the receiver position and pay up for those types of players. So I'm willing to still punt at tight end. There are a couple punty tight ends I do kind of like, or that pique my interest, I should say. But obviously, it's still okay to obviously exchange one of those for a tight end, and then you just pay down for a cheaper wide receiver.
With that in mind, let's get to the main event, which is always trying to find the cheapest tight end possible. I see the names, Andrew. I think we need a rule. If you cannot pronounce the name of the sub 3K tight end that you are trying to tout, we cannot play them in cash. So talk to me about Brevin Jordan and Josiah DeGuara.
Josiah DeGuara.
I can't. I kind of pronounced it right. Damn. All right. So it is alive. Either way, man, I don't know about this. Sell me though, Andrew. You're a smart guy. Let's hear what you got.
All right, so Brevin Jordan, he's at 2.8K. He leads the Texans in target rate per route run. He has a 30% target rate per route run when Davis Mills is at quarterback. And I think the matchup is really good against the Jacksonville Jaguars. They've been one of the worst defenses in terms of strength of schedule per PFF's strength of schedule tool against the tight end position. So, he's been making plays. And even over the last 4 weeks, when it hasn't been Davis Mills under center, in terms of target rate per route run, he ranks 3rd in the NFL, behind only Gronk, George Kittle, Travis Kelce. Like he's like getting targeted at a hyper rate. Now,
did you just find a stat for Brevin Jordan that puts him with Gronk, Kelce, and like Kittle? Touche, my friend.
It's wild. It's wild, but he's just being hyper targeted, and it makes sense that the Texans are getting some of the younger players involved. I know they've been talking about like using Jordan Akins more in like a running back role, like having him actually like block in the backfield because they had a lot of injuries at the running back position. So I'm not like concerned about like Pharaoh Brown or any of those other guys. Anthony Eclair, I think, is the other tight end on the Texans. So it's a good matchup. Brevin Jordan, I mean, he has more touchdowns this year than Kyle Pitts does. He's been a good rookie tight end so far when he's gotten the opportunity to play, and he's seeing his snaps uptick. So look, he's got a high target rate per route run. That's kind of what I'm leaning towards. And then the other guy, Josiah DeGuara, same thing. So he ran a route on over 60% of Aaron Rodgers dropbacks last week. So that's pretty good tight end usage. That's kind of what we're looking for in the 60% range. And he's playing the Baltimore Ravens. You know, they're a bottom 5 team in terms of fantasy points allowed per game to tight ends. So we know Rodgers is going to be able to do whatever he wants against the Ravens secondary. They don't really have anyone that can stop any of these other players. And I mean, he's 2,700. Like, he's like super dirt cheap. And he's a good matchup. He is the leading tight end in terms of running the most routes. So those are the things I'm looking for when I'm trying to pay down. Like, it would have been the football. I mean, it would have been Seals Jones. Like, he would have been locked and loaded, but then it became a friggin' duo between him and John Bates. So now that's friggin' useless between against the Eagles. Like, that would have been the layup play, but unfortunately, we don't know. Like, dude, like, what's the football team doing with these like injured guys? And like, oh yeah, Curtis Samuel, like, massive contract. Let's sign him and like have him run like 5 routes per game. Like,
when Terry McLaurin like gets hurt, like, if there's ever a time to, you know, he's active, he's out there. You didn't put him on IR. You paid him this money. Like, what are you waiting for? Andrew, the only thing you didn't give me on Brevin Jordan, like, he was literally Chris Herndon's successor at Miami, man. That's all you needed to say to sell me on it, and I would have been
he was a good college tight end too. Yeah, he was. I mean, I think he was like clearly third in the class behind Pitts, Freiermuth. So yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. Like, it's one thing to like get behind like a Jack Doyle when his like target rate per route run is like really high for a couple weeks, and you're like, ugh, like, this kind of sucks. But like, Jordan is like, he's athletic tight end. Like, we know he can make a big play here or there, and Davis Mills seems to favor him. And in this Jacksonville Texans game, like, there's going to be some points. Like, I could see like the Jaguars kind of like playing a little bit more upbeat now that Urban Meyer's kind of been moved on. So we can maybe see some more fantasy points scored from both sides in this matchup.
Man, you put that 2.8K tight end in the lineup, and all of a sudden the whole world,
you do so much, dude. So much.
All right. I didn't think I was going to be able to pitch a sub 3K tight end this week, but I agree with Andrew. It does help a lot. Brevin Jordan, 2.8K, and our guy from Green Bay, whose name I'm not going to butcher again, 2.8. Truly, though, I mean, if you want to go all the way up to Kittle, be my guest. We do need to see, I believe, well, what's going on with his knee exactly? I think just maybe rest.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing with like, I mean, right now, like, someone was asking me about like Fournette being on the injury report. It's like, guys, like, it's the end of the season. It's December. Like everyone's gonna be in the injury report on Wednesday. Like, no, like Wednesday, like, nobody practices because it's like, what's the point? Like, everyone's banged up. They have an extra game they have to play. So, I mean, week 18 is going to be wild when we do DFS, because I can only imagine like half these teams are like none of these, like, we've heard of literally none of these guys. It's going to be like preseason DFS all over again.
That's when we got to get our handy dandy Monday, like who's playing for what articles out into the world. If you don't want to go that cheap, and if you don't want to go that expensive, I do think your sweet spot is Pat Freiermuth at 4.5K. Continues to score touchdowns. I like the more touchdowns than Kyle Pitts stat. I'm just going to start using that for almost every player in the league. But with Freiermuth last week, like, he almost caught his second touchdown at the end of regulation. Fantastic play by Harrison Smith to knock that ball out. So Big Ben been playing a little bit less crappy lately. You can imagine with Freiermuth against the Titans, just like Deontay gets going. Finally, on the defense, Andrew, like, the days of getting these 2,100 defenses are done. They raised our damn price floor. Now we got to pay 2.4K for even the worst ones out there. With that said, Giants at 2.6K against a hurt version of Dak Prescott. The Jets at 2.5K versus a Dolphins offensive line that I pimped out the stats a few times this week. Second worst pass blocking grade in the PFF era, which goes all the way back to 2006. Also got the Jaguars at 2.8K to pair with James Robinson against the Texans. And ideally, if you can get up to them, the Bills at 3.1K against PJ Walker / Cam Newton. Are you trying to lean on any of them, Andrew, or is there a wild card in play that I did not mention?
No, I think you hit the main ones. I mean, Panthers, like, at 2,400, like, they are, I get like that why they're obviously rank that because they're playing the Buffalo Bills, but they're literally tied with Buffalo in fewest yards per play allowed this season. So, like, anytime you can play like a real life good defense that's that it's only matchup based, like they're not gonna like get you negative points probably. So then I'm gonna take the discount. Like, they're not someone maybe you want to play. I don't think they're gonna go out and score like 20 points or anything like that, unless we really see that Josh Allen is like hampered by this ankle injury or whatever's wrong with his foot. I know that we saw him like a different picture of him and he's like fine, but we'll see. Well, I mean, we'll see. And we know Josh Allen can sometimes be injured or turnover prone at sometimes when he gets kind of wild. So, Carolina has a real life good defense. So this isn't one of those plays where you're playing Jacksonville at the stone min because you're just trying to save money and you know their defense sucks or whatever. But Panthers defense is really good. Like you mentioned, like Stephon Gilmore is like one of the best cornerbacks this year in terms of passer rating generated when targeted. So if he's on Diggs, like they can make some plays. So I like the Panthers.
Ideally, on these cheap Ds, we want a really good real life defense. We want them to be at home. Want them to be facing a bad offense. Obviously, very hard to check all those boxes when we're looking sub 3K. The Panthers, though, they do check being a very good real life defense. And the Bills aren't a bad offense, but a banged up version of Josh Allen, who, as we know, kind of has that Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson in him, where you will see these games where he's taking more sacks than he should. I do think that makes a lot of sense.
They also don't run the football. Like they have to throw. And every time a guy quarterback drop backs to throw, it's another chance you can get a sack, another chance you can get an interception. Not when teams are running the football, which, I mean, dude, like I had the under on Devin Singletary last week, and the fact that he on one of his 4 carries, he rips off this 40-yard run. I'm just like tilting my face off.
Watching that first half, like, we're good. Already spending the money you're supposed to be making. Yeah, as Woody Hayes once said, when you throw the ball, 2 bad things can happen out of the 3 possible outcomes. Maybe a little bit outdated thought there, but shout out to Woody. All right, Andrew, overarching thoughts on cash games. We're looking at Tua as the cheap quarterback play, Stafford if you want to go on and get up, James Robinson, James Conner, lock them into the RB spots. Depending on how injuries shake out, Elijah Mitchell and Sony Michel are going to be more than viable as well if Darrell Henderson and if Darrell Henderson is out and if Mitchell is playing. Wide receiver, we got Van Jefferson sitting pretty, 5.6K if OBJ is out. Gabriel Davis, 3.7K with Emmanuel Sanders out. We can get up to Cooper Kupp, but we also got Deontay Johnson more than viable, and also Devontae Parker, 4.3K. Brevin Jordan, cheap tight end play of the week. We have reached Brevin Jordan era in this stage of the podcast. Also, a Pat Fryermuth at 4.5K, Kittle 7.5K. If you're really trying to pay up and get the best tight end in the game at the moment, then on defense, I do think the Panthers at 2.4K make a lot of sense, particularly since we don't have any Bills in this cash game lineup that we are going for. So let's move on a little bit to some GPP goodness. 2 quarterbacks that caught my eye. Aaron Rodgers, 7.5K. Look, this Ravens secondary, all sorts of banged up. And really, when you look at them this year, they've been blitzing at a top 6 rate, I believe, but they haven't been getting as much pressure on the quarterback as usual. And that has been Rodgers' kryptonite. Largest drop off in yards per attempt this year when kept clean versus when pressured. But more and more, man, like when we look at the Packers in the first 12, 13 weeks of the year, they kind of resembled more so the 2019 version of the team as opposed to the world-beating 2020 version. But then you look at these last 3 games they played, 31 points, 36 points, then 45 points. Rodgers is just clicking on all cylinders right now, and I do want to continue to have exposure to him. Without having Randall Cobb in the picture, it's a lot easier, I think, to get in these complimentary receivers. So going with Rodgers, then Devontae Adams, and then going down to an MVS or a Allen Lazard again. It's one of these combinations where I get it. Devontae and Rodgers are costing you a lot, but because the third option of the stack is so much cheaper than we're used to seeing, it actually is a little bit more affordable to get up to than people think. And I'm also a fan of Russell Wilson at 6.4K, playing against a potentially Ramsey-less Rams secondary. So if he's out with that, I do think we could finally see Russ put it all together. Tyler Lockett has been doing his thing, like really for the past 4 weeks. Wildest part about this Russ comeback is Tyler Lockett is finally a consistent fantasy football wide receiver. As we saw last week, and as we'll get to, DK Metcalf was awfully close to really breaking out himself last week. Had a touchdown nullified, roasted a guy for another score and got a defensive pass interference, and then Russ goes right back to him and throws a slant about 5 yards behind him on what could have been a touchdown. So, like the Seahawks, like the Packers. Andrew, you like the Bengals, and my God, you like the Steelers. But hey, Big Ben, credit where credit's due. He's been putting up some fantasy points lately.
Yeah, you just don't watch games. Big Ben. Like that. That's the main thing. It's like, oh, he scored 30 fantasy points. Like, how that happens? Yeah, pretty much. So Joe Burrow. I feel like I talk about Joe Burrow every single week on tournaments, but just because it's a quarterback that has a high ceiling because he has explosive playmakers and we know exactly where the ball is going. Like, it's such a concentrated target share. He's like the easiest quarterback to double stack with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. Like, they make up for more than 50% of the targets. Like, CJ Uzma is running wind sprints. Tyler Boyd is just really not a factor in this offense. And you have these two, like, borderline top 15 wide receivers at his disposal. And I love the matchup against Denver. If you look at the way Denver plays, they play a lot of man coverage. They rank top 5 in terms of coverage snaps from a man coverage look. And Joe Burrow, PFF's highest graded quarterback, gets man coverage this year. So, like, that's when Jamar Chase makes his big plays. Like, when they're playing zone, it's like, okay, like, it's hard for him to take the top off the defense. But, you know, with some of the Broncos, like, the Broncos have, like, good cornerbacks, like, that they're willing to put on islands with these guys. And I'm going to make the bet that the Bengals receivers are more talented than the Denver corners and that they can, you know, overwhelm them, especially Chase. I mean, we're going to see some Chase versus Surtain. Like, that's going to be fun to watch, the two college players. So it'll be fun to watch those guys kind of duke it out. But, yeah, I think that Burrow, Chase, Higgins makes a lot of sense. What happened?
Jalen Waddle, COVID IR.
Oh, no. All right, so Tua and Devontae Parker. Well, Devontae Parker now is just like, got to lock him in cash games, at least. So that gives you the salary to get at Stafford.
Pain. Why would you take Waddle from us? This couldn't have happened a week ago when they were on bye. Oh, my gosh.
Well,
all right.
Clearly they're... Clearly, we're seeing where the outbreaks are all happening. So if you have like Dolphins players, like Browns players, like, you should make sure you have backups. Oh man, this means I have to start Julio Jones in one of my leagues.
That's what
God.
I'm really thinking about. Like, oh
Gross.
my God, I've Waddle everywhere. I touted him all damn offseason, Andrew, and he got us. He did a great job, and he was coming into his own. This was supposed to be the true A+ stretch. Damn, I'm disappointed. Hope you get better. Jalen, obviously.
Yeah, so don't play Jalen Waddle, play Devontae Parker. So, I mean, Devontae Parker now has to be like, I mean, he's a lock in cash.
Andrew, I don't know about you, but I'm not going to play Waddle at all this week. I'm not going to put him in any lineups when he's not going to be playing football. Yeah, Parker's got to be a lock. Okay, but do we think now, like, what's Albert Wilson priced at? He's already been out there. Is he like 3K? Because that could be.
He's out there. I mean, I know Matt Collins has also played a decent amount in there.
But Albert would be the guy that gets Waddle's like 1 yard ADOT passes, you know?
Yeah, and then also like it probably heightens the floor for Gesicki. Because again, he's like the other slot receiver they have on the team.
But I feel like Gesicki like isn't used that. I think if anything, it's going to benefit Albert Wilson and Myles Gaskin if he can play. Gaskin, if he can play.
Yeah, he's another guy we could probably play in cash because the Jets are terrible.
Especially, I'd say, with Waddle out. Because we know the Jets are terrible, but also the Dolphins just can't run the ball. But someone is going to be getting those more or less extensions of the run game. It's going to be Albert Wilson or it's going to be Myles Gaskin.
They're going to move Duke Johnson in the slot. Like they talk about every single summer.
Quit playing with my heartstrings, Andrew. I have all my guys. I'm usually pretty good at separating the, dudes I'm a really big fan of and who's actually a good fantasy player. But then Cordero Patterson comes out of nowhere this year and becomes a fantasy star. So like my whole world has kind of been flipped inside out. I'm just going to start drafting Chris Herndon in round 2 next year. Okay.
But so I'll just mention on Big Ben real quickly. It just, again, like I like this. I like this game. Like I like the Steelers Titans game. You have two teams that are both like they stand out a little bit offensive pace per game or plays per game. The last 6 weeks, Steelers are 10th, Titans are 17th. So you got a little bit of up tempo. You have the Titans being a pass funnel defense. They're very bad against the pass, but much better against the run. So, and we've seen Big Ben, get it done over the last couple of weeks. I know it's been kind of gross to watch. And I know, like, if you watch the Thursday night game with the Vikings, you're like, okay, this offense is going to literally do nothing. And then he goes out and like scores like 30 points in the second half. But he's been a top 15 fantasy quarterback in 4 of his last 5 games, including 2 inside the top 8. So, yeah, I mean, again, it's kind of the same thing with Burrow where you play Big Ben, you stack him with Chase Claypool and Deontay Johnson. Like, exactly, like, you're not going to be surprised necessarily, or even like a Freiermuth. So it's pretty clear cut like who your stacking partners. Because that's part of the equation with these tournaments is you can play the quarterback, but hits you got to make sure you hit on the receivers too. So I think Stafford as well in tournaments is also like very viable because you have Kupp, Higbee, and Van Jefferson. So it's pretty clear cut.
Moving on to some running backs. We talked about Gaskin. Maybe we still have to find out if he gets off the COVID list. Same thing with Salvin Ahmed. Same thing with all these guys. So obviously a situation that is still unfolding, but the Jets are the league's worst defense, fantasy points per game, allowed to running backs. Obviously expecting Gaskin to, if he's active, take a lot of those Waddle targets. And also Deontay Foreman at 5.2K. Andrew, I heard you mention him earlier, and he did catch my eye as well when I was initially going through it. Disgusting usage with Hilliard and McNichols staying equally involved last week. None of these guys played even 40% of the snaps, but we've seen the Titans kind of do this even with Derrick Henry, where it took Henry years to even get to like a 70-80% snap roll. Still got his touches, just kind of left us wanting a little bit more. Foreman might not need that large of a role to convert 15 to 20 carries into a lot of production against the Steelers' league worst defense in yards before contact allowed per carry. They are getting run over in recent weeks, man. After dropping that one to the Vikings last week, like, I don't think that's really going to be that heartbreaking loss. I don't think that's going to be what really turns around this currently sad state of the Pittsburgh Steelers defense. So Foreman, something to keep in mind. Also Jeff Wilson at 5K if Elijah Mitchell stays out. But even then, man, like, I'm not loving the ceiling on these guys. Do we think the move is just to, in tournaments, like, you said it, we have Robinson, we have Connor, we have these guys. So maybe the move is to go really cheap at wide receiver, pay up to get like Mixon, Najee, and Cordero, maybe like Aaron Jones sick. Because look, man, I'm trying to look for these mid and lower price guys. They're not there. I see the ownership really concentrating more on the few guys that we know are fine, the 5-6K range. Maybe, again, general tournament roster construction strategy. We really pay up a running back and just fill out the rest of the lineup as we can.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely seems like a week where you want to play 4 wide receivers in tournaments, just because we see this all the time. Like, receivers just have really high ceilings because they can get there on big plays and things like that. Where running backs, it's like really hard to find like a super like under rostered running back that sees the ball like 20 times. Like they're not under roster most of the time. So I think that, but in this particular week where we're talking and we're saying like, gross, like don't want to pay up for running back, don't want to pay up for running backs. Like, all right, like, just play Joe Mixon then. Like 25 touches per game over the last 4 weeks, and he'll be under 10%, I guarantee. And it's not because he's not going to work with the roster construction. He's never a bad play, because if you touch the ball 25 times per game, like, chances are you're going to do something. And if you look at Denver and the way their defense has actually given up fantasy points to running backs, you know, on the year, the season long totals are pretty good. I think they're like a little bit above average in terms of fantasy points allowed to running backs, but if you look at the running backs that actually saw volume against them, those guys have all hit over 20 fantasy points. So Mixon has a guy that we're going to see a big workload. I mean, he's had big workloads, even though he hasn't done a lot the last 2 weeks specifically. But, I mean, no one's going to be surprised when Mixon gets 30 carries and scores 30 fantasy points, because that's what he does. So, again, I just don't – there's, like, not a lot of people talking about the Bengals as, like, an offense that people want pieces of. But I see a lot of opportunities with them against Denver, because I think Denver's defense is okay. It's not like this – juggernaut, we can't fade everyone against Denver. I think they're okay, and I just think that it wouldn't be surprising to see the Bengals, put up points on them.
I'm surprised that Denver is like a slight favorite in this one, man. Like, I don't think it's out of the question that Burrow and company hit a big play early. Teddy can't keep up because he's been playing, like the bad version of Teddy for the better part of the past 2 months. And all of a sudden the Bengals have the sort of positive game script that we know Mixon needs to thrive. The dude had how many straight like RB1 weeks before last week's dud? Like, let's not let one down performance get us off it. Love that Mixon call. All right, quickly, some wide receivers, had Devontae Parker down here. Obviously he's going to be a bit too chalky for some of these tournaments. With that said, though, I mentioned the Green Bay offense. We can go down to Lazard and MVS, both guys playing full-time roles with Randall Cobb out of the picture. Also, DK Metcalf explosion. Should have happened last week. Maybe we get it this week. Still just 6.2K. That is such an insult. And even if Ramsey comes back and plays everyone, he scored 2 touchdowns on the Rams in his last 2 matchups against them. That's why wide receiver cornerback matchups are helpful, but they're also not a rule of thumb. Good tiebreaker, and I'll take that ownership break any chance I can get it there. And I also do want to try to cash in on Amari Cooper, just 6.4K. I thought he looked healthier than he has all season last week. I know Dak's not looking great. With that said, though, man, I know PFF's own Seth Galina had a pretty good thread where, one of the smartest football guys at our company went through each and every play with Dak, and he was kind of rejecting this notion that Dak played as terribly as a lot of people thought. Like, okay, I'm not trying to defend that fourth quarter pick. That was maybe one of the worst picks we've seen all year. I think his point was you remove that boneheaded play where Dak just pretty clearly didn't see the guy. Like, it was a terrible throw, but he just didn't see the guy. Overall on the game, maybe wasn't quite as bad as we all thought. So this Cowboys offense, still second-ranked scoring offense in the league. And if we can get the healthy version of Amari Cooper, I mean, that's a guy that we know can go for 100, 200 plus with multiple touchdowns during any given week. Haven't seen it a lot this year. Had the COVID list, thing, has been playing through a multitude of lower body injuries. Just remember, Amari Cooper can be that guy, pal, when things are fully clicking for him. Now, Andrew, these are tournaments, so we're trying to get out there. I see you were also in on a certain Cowboy wide receiver. CeeDee Lamb, full-time from the slot. Didn't quite have the explosion we were hoping for last week, but with this role they have for him right now, the floor is pretty high, and the ceiling, as we know, is the roof.
Yeah, CeeDee Lamb is like this volcano in its slumber. Like he always he'll have one game where he has a ton of air yards and high value opportunities, and the next game he won't cash in on them. We're it didn't happen. Then everyone kind of goes away from Lamb, and then he does it the next week. You're like, oh, we were just a week early, and that's kind of the case here with Lamb. He's been seeing a ton of end zone targets, a ton of air yards, and last week he's actually led the team with a 24% target share. So I always look at that. I'm like he still saw the targets, and like you had mentioned, he was used in the slot. That's how you attack this Giants defense. They have allowed the fifth most fantasy points to wide receivers over the last 4 weeks, and they rank sixth in targets to wide receivers aligned inside from the slot. So Lamb, he had a decent game against the Giants when they played earlier in the season, 84 yards and a score. So I think CeeDee Lamb, again, there are just some players that you just got to play every single week because you know that the explosions are there. And Lamb, same thing with Jamar Chase. I was playing him every single week, and it's finally worked last week, after a very long stretch of just underwhelming and drops and things like that. It just happens. So with these blow-up wide receivers, we know who they are. You just got to keep playing them. I think you go back to the well here with CeeDee Lamb.
And if you look at Dak this year, we had the week 1 game against the Buccaneers. He throws the ball 58 times. We're like, oh, okay. Cooper, CeeDee, top 10 wide receivers every week. Then they got in that win streak where Dak, they were running the ball a ton because Zeke and Pollard at that point were both crushing it. And we saw 4 straight games where Dak didn't throw the ball more than 32 times. Some game script, induced it going after that. But over these past 2 weeks, the Cowboys have been up by double digits for the overwhelming majority of the Washington game and a good amount of that Saints game. And we're still seeing Dak flirt with that 40 pass attempt mark. So with Zeke as banged up as he is, with Pollard banged up himself, I think the Cowboys are willing to put a little bit more on Dak's arm. And I get it. He hasn't been playing well. We've talked about the splits pre and post calf injury on this podcast. But Andrew, we only need to go back 3 weeks to find the last time he went for 375 freaking yards. So when you have guys as good as CeeDee and Cooper, I agree. Got to get those shots in on them every single week. Anyone else you wanted to talk about here? I think you already kind of mentioned the Bengals. We both on DK Metcalf, and Marquez Valdes-Scantling always has that one-hitter quitter ability with that deep ball. Any other thoughts on wide receiver, Andrew?
No, man, I think that's really... Oh, I think we should just mention briefly the Cardinals wide receivers. So without DeAndre Hopkins in the fold, I'm leaning towards Christian Kirk at 5,300 as the kind of the guy. Basically when I broke down the splits for these 3 guys between Moore and Green, and it gets complicated because Green missed one of those games. Yeah. So we really you have 2 games where they all played, and then you have the game against Green Bay where Hopkins played 25% of the snaps. So I kind of took from that. And really, you have one game where Rondale Moore had 11 catches for 51 yards, and that really kind of inflates his total outlook. Really, it was Kirk that saw the most routes. That's the guy who really saw probably the most usage upgrade. Rondale Moore did play a little bit. He already has a really high target rate per route run. I just don't know how high his ceiling is unless he breaks off this massive play. Yeah. And if you look at the Lions, at least the way that they've kind of given up efficiency numbers this year, it's been to slot receivers. So they rank 26 in passer rating allowed to wide receivers aligned to the slot, where they rank 5th. To receivers lined up outside. So we know Green, that's the only difference I can find between Green and Kirk. It's Kirk plays in the slot, Green does it. But air yards, targets, routes, it's so close that I think that I do lean on the Kirk side ever so slightly.
I give it to Kirk as well. I think they're fine guys to, pick and pop into GPP lineups. I'm not convinced enough that there's enough volume going around to any single player to really trust in cash at this point. And like, look, go back 2 weeks ago and Kyler threw the ball literally 15 times. All those same volume problems that have impacted DeAndre Hopkins all year also impact all of these guys as well. They spread the ball around. Obviously, it's working out just fine in real life, but we're going to have each of Kirk, AJ Green, Wesley, potentially. We've seen Rondale Moore pop off for 8 to 10 target games on occasion. And also, don't sleep on Zach Ertz. If anything, Andrew, and this takes us right into tight end, I do think Zach Ertz makes a lot of sense at 5,400 as a tournament option. They use him as their like red zone guy when Hopkins is unavailable, or they just feel like getting the ball to someone else, which makes sense. Ertz has continued to be a solid player in the in the red zone for them this year. He had the 2 touchdown game with Colt McCoy under center a couple weeks ago. Like, he's popped off and shown the ceiling on several occasions with the Cardinals. And again, without Hopkins there, we can expect him to be more and more ingrained and basically starting, 3 or 4 wide receiver sets the way they use him. So if I'm going to pay up, not to Kittle, I do think Ertz makes the most sense. Mike Gesicki does get a bump as well from not having Jalen Waddle. Again, though, I just think we need to... Waddle is such a target hog that everyone does deserve a little bump, but let's just keep in mind, I don't think that Gesicki and Parker's role is changing. I don't think they're now on Thursday and Friday practice, like all of a sudden just completely changing what Gesicki and Parker are doing in the offense. I think Albert Wilson and Myles Gaskin are probably going to have the largest overall difference in their pre and post Waddle target splits. And if you want to go cheap, but not disgustingly cheap, CJ Uzomah, 3.1K. Everything about the Bengals offense that Andrew's been saying also applies to their tight end, who one of the more touchdown-dependent tight ends in the league. But if you look at him over the last few weeks, Andrew, we actually have gotten a little bit more of a yardage floor than we're used to. 56 yards against the Niners last week. Not as much against the Chargers, but at least we do have 6 targets in back-to-back games. So have a low floor with Uzomah, but just 3.1K, and very few other options to like at that range. I'm not totally against it. We kind of talked about Ertz a little bit already. We talked about Gesicki a little bit already. What about, Andrew, the guy that kind of shares your name, Mark Andrews?
Kind of shares my name. It's pretty close.
That's a transition right there, man. Let's go.
You take off and really, I think that this is the move you want to make. If you build a bunch of lineups with Kittle in them, who I think is clearly the best tight end play on the slate, just from a raw fantasy points total, you got to swap off off Kittle if your lineup's not doing great. And Andrews, he also plays in the late window of games. Like, people are concerned because it was Lamar going to play, even though last week, Huntley, he was just dialed into getting Andrews as many targets as humanly possible. Yeah. Like, Andrews has really been, even though we've seen Lamar and the offense kind of fall off a little bit the last couple of weeks, Andrews has not fallen off. His targets are still maintained, very consistent. He's one of the most he has the highest target share among all tight ends for the last 4 weeks. He's a freaking hog in that offense. So again, weird things happen. I know that Kittle is obviously going to project better than Andrews, but if you need to catch the field, preying on another George Kittle 40-point game when he's 20% owned is not going to help you in any tournament. So you got to swap off him to Mark Andrews, even if you have to eat some salary in the process. So just something to keep in mind, because they do both play in the late window, so you can make the late swap there. And then the other guy I want to mention is Tyler Higbee. So he's at 4K. Again, he didn't play last week, but I don't think OBJ is going to play. Basically, guys that test positive for COVID, you just don't play the same week that they test. So Higbee's back. He's now off the COVID list because he tested positive or Monday, or he wasn't back. I don't know exactly, but he's off the list. So he should play in this game, and he should be the number 3 receiver behind Cooper Kupp and Van Jefferson. And Tyler Higbee's had this really coveted role all year long. He's been running around over 85% of dropbacks. That's top 5 in the league. And the matchup is finally good for him. Seahawks have allowed the most fantasy points to the position over the last 4 weeks, 5th most on the season. So, I've been pounding, it's funny. I was fading Higbee all off season. It's no, this guy's not going to run enough routes. And then, of course, he runs more routes than any other tight end, just can't get targeted because of all the target competition. And now that's somewhat narrower. No Woods, no OBJ potentially. This is a spot where I do want to go back to Higbee. He's at 4K. So I really think he should be priced a lot higher. It's crazy. Ertz is more expensive than Dallas Goedert. It's just weird to look at it. Wait, but you kind of get it at the same time. You're dude, am I really going to pay 5.4K for Zach Ertz? So I think Higbee's in a very similar role, similar touchdown upside, and kind of similar situation. You're taking one piece out of that offense. So maybe instead of paying up for Ertz, you save some money, you play Higbee instead.
No, I think it's a great point. Kind of like our Miami example, I don't think that Beckham going down necessarily shifts everything to Jefferson. Like, okay, they have been using Beckham as a field stretcher, but Jefferson as well, I think, has been actually going further downfield. And if you look at that Monday night game, OBJ was actually the guy that they were kind of using a little bit more in the underneath areas. Obviously busted that crosser, had the one-on-one touchdown. So if you look at the Seahawks defense, they're not good. Like, I'm not trying to say that necessarily, but facing passes thrown at least 20 yards downfield, only 11 completions allowed, 8.8 yards per attempt, 23.4% explosive pass play rate. Those are all top 3 marks in the league. So if they are so hell-bent on stopping Jefferson deep, guys like Tyler Higbee, guys like Cooper Kupp should be eating in the underneath areas of the field. Real quick, on defense, I always like to list a handful of groups where I think they have a running back that is expecting to be a bell cow to some extent, also a good matchup against a bad offense. So Saquon and the Giants DST. I know the Cowboys aren't a bad offense, completely contradicting myself immediately. As we know, though, Dak could continue to play a little bit hurt, as we saw last week. James Robinson, the Jaguars defense against the Texans. Najee Harris and Pittsburgh defense against the Titans, who have truly been a bottom 5 offense since losing Derrick Henry. Devin Singletary and the Bills defense against the Panthers. If Josh is banged up, maybe we see Singletary get there, but man, I can barely even sell myself on that. So, let's just disregard Devin Singletary, and now he'll probably go off because I said that. And then finally, Myles Gaskin in that Miami defense against the Jets. Any final defense thoughts, Andrew?
No, I mean, I love the James Robinson Jags defense call. I mean, look, people, like, the Jags have sucked all year, but, like, this is the week to play Jags. Like, I'm sorry, like, and I think that we'll probably see the Jags DST. I know, like, the last time I checked the projections, because I was really interested to see, like, who would be more popular, Texans DST or Jags DST? Because at the same price, of course, DraftKings really putting us in a bind because we would have just played whoever was cheaper, but they're like, nah, like, we're going to make them the same price, make everybody choose between these two bad defenses. So, I mean, but I think that's a reason to lean towards Jags because you mentioned, like, you can stack with James Robinson. I'm not playing Texas. I'm not doing the Texans running back thing. Like, every time I'm like, ooh, like, David Johnson's, like, in a good spot. Like, okay, 10 touches. Great. Like, didn't work out. Like, James Robinson, I feel really confident about him this week. Like, they want to get him going. Darrell Bevel, knows how to get the run game going with James Robinson. I think that last week they were going to do it, but the game script, like, they fell behind. They ran 20 plays in the first half, couldn't establish it. Like, James Robinson, like, his first carry, like, lost like 5 yards. It's like, all right, well, this isn't going to work. We got to throw the football. I think James Robinson is going to blow up in this game. So I like them in the Jags defense. I think it makes a lot of sense.
And now for the main event, the prop prophet himself. I can't find your overall record, but I know it's damn good. We've been doing this. The people know.
It's good. That's all we need to talk.
The people know
it's
good. We are not coming here and selling you people lies. We own up to it. We talk about what happened the previous week, where Andrew told us Derek Carr under 265.5 passing yards. Easy win, finished with 262. Win is a win is a win. Marvin Jones unfortunately decided to go over on his receiving yards for the first time in Lord knows how long. 1-1 week. Again, doing great on the year, though. So, Andrew, what do you have for the people ahead of this week 15?
Yeah, so it's playoff time, so we're going all over. Like, we're doing overs. We're not enough of these unders. Marvin Jones, with that BS 31-yard catch he had at the end of the second half, he just oh god, tilting my face off. So number one, so Justin Fields over 180.5 passing yards. Look, I don't understand why the lines open so low for Justin Fields. Like, he's like an NFL quarterback. Like, it should at least be like opening at like 200 passing yards
against the Vikings too. Come on,
look. The Vikings have allowed over the last 4 weeks over 305 passing yards per game. Like, I get that Fields is not this like prolific pocket passer, and like he does make up a lot of his production on the ground, but all of his receivers are healthy. Like, Allen Robinson is back. Like, not to say Robinson's doing a lot on his own, but he's still a good receiver that's out there, catching passes from Justin Fields. Like, he has Darnell Mooney, like, who's kind of disappeared the last 2 weeks. So, I mean, Fields, he's thrown for over 200 yards in his last 2 starts. He's averaging in those last 2 starts over 30 passing attempts per game. So this is not the same Bears offense we saw at the beginning of the year where they like wouldn't let Fields throw the ball. It's opening up a little bit more. He's running. He's throwing the ball downfield. So, yeah, I think this one's easy. Their defense that he's facing on Monday night is atrocious. It's in the dome, and the PFF projections have him for 225.5 passing yards. That's 40 yards more than, the line is set at. So I think that it's an easy over with Justin Fields. And then the second one is Deontay Foreman over 45.5 rushing yards. Now, nice. I know there's obviously concerns about, like, is he like the lead guy? And like, that's really the only way to see this failing because, I mean, the Pittsburgh Steelers run defense is like bottom 5. Like it's gross. It's atrocious. Yeah. I mean, Dalvin Cook could have friggin' had like a cup of coffee, like, made lunch. Like those lanes are just absolutely massive. He
had 115 before contact. The only other guy to do that this year was Jonathan Taylor in that Jets just massacre.
It's just like they weren't even trying to stop him on the ground. Like, so Deontay Foreman, I think, 45.5. It's just too low of a number. I think, he should still be viewed as like the early down back. He has 32 carries in his last 2 games. He's averaging 4.9 yards per carry. I know he played with fewer snaps than McNichols and Hilliard last week, but he didn't play in the fourth quarter. And they've kind of been like experimenting with how they've used him, because like the week before when they played the Patriots, like all they did was play in the fourth quarter. So I think they're still trying to figure out how they view these running backs, but I think they do view, like, from, if you kind of zoom out, I think they look at Foreman as like, all right, he's like our closest thing that we have to like Derrick Henry in terms of an early down bruiser back. Like, we're going to pound him against the Steelers defense that has shown literally nothing in the run game. Like, they can't stop the run. And it's just so weird because it's the Steelers. I'm not sure why the line is set like that, because it is the Steelers. But, what we've seen from Pittsburgh is one of the worst run defenses in the league this year. They're ranked 4th worst in the league in rushing yards allowed per game and dead last over the last 4 weeks. Obviously, the Dalvin Cook explosion on Thursday night has a lot to do with it. But, dude, when Alex Collins rushes for 100 yards against you, like, that tells you everything. Like that should have been our sign when that happened. To like, wait a minute, like Alex Collins rushed for 100 yards. Like, that should have been, yeah, exactly. And ever since then, it's just been all downhill for Pittsburgh. So I think that he could probably get this, on 1 or 2 drives. Honestly, like, he had 42 rushing yards like in the first half last week. So I think this is a good spot for Foreman.
We need to make that like a Monday segment next year. Like, all right, what one stat happening should we just completely overreact to, but like maybe actually for good reasons?
So it's like when bad players do something like kind of stands out. Like, wait a minute, it's like, does this mean this player's like, we know this player's not good, so this is telling us about the defense. Like, that's kind of what we got to do.
It's like when Amon-Ra St. Brown, catches, what was his stats against the Vikings? Amon-Ra St. Brown catches 10 balls for 86 yards in the tutty against the Vikings. Like, oh, is Amon-Ra St. Brown the second coming of Wes Welker? Or maybe, just maybe, is this Vikings secondary a little bit rough? I do love that Fields call. Over 180.5 passing yards. Deontay Foreman over 45.5 rushing yards.
Yep.
Fantastic stuff from the prop prophet himself. Andrew, everyone can find your work on PFF.com. On this podcast, you're also all over the industry, always grinding. Fantasy football, start 'em, sit 'em, buy low and sell high targets based on high value opportunities. Fantasy football ranks and always there on Monday with the week's top waiver wire pickups. Anything else you want to get off your chest, my friend?
Nah, man. Good luck to everybody in DFS this week, and good luck to your fantasy football playoffs. Again, this is the crunch time. Don't overthink things. Worst comes to worst, just go with the ponies that got you there.
And hopefully you have a first round bye, so that Jalen Waddle pony.
Yeah, exactly. And don't play Jalen Waddle.
Don't play. Yeah, that's what the biggest thing you should take away from this podcast is: do not play Jalen Waddle this week. He's out. So follow Andrew on Twitter at Andrew Erickson _. You can check me out at Hartitz. As always, Andrew will be holding it down with Dwayne on Friday night doing the injury thing. I'm going to be chilling in Chicago, but don't worry, we'll be back Sunday night reviewing all the action that just happened, and then back to our usually regularly scheduled programming. My goodness, Ian, learn how to talk in week 16 and beyond. So for Andrew, I'm Ian. Thanks as always for tuning in. Until next time, take care, everybody.